everyone. Today we're going to be talking about an episode called Fighting on the Frontier. And this was season 12, episode 4, up in Drumlanrig in Dumfries and Galloway in Scotland. And joining me today to actually talk about his memories, is the one and only Dr. John Gator. John, hi, how are you doing?
Not too bad. It's good to see you after all this time.
I know, it's been a while, hasn't it?
You've not changed a bit.
Oh, bless you. Thank you very much. I'm not
You're looking younger.
Bless you. Well, so are you with your beard.
Oh, this grew overnight. Yeah, it's something to do with lockdown, and not being able to get out to the barbers. I won't say anything about this bit.
So going back to Drumlanrig, this a wonderful site. It's Roman Fort up in Scotland. What are your memories of that episode?
Well, I can remember there's some very good whiskey in Scotland.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I used to dabble quite a lot with malt whiskey. But on the serious side, this was just an amazing site. I'd seen some of the early photographs that suggested there might be a Roman fort here. Now, I'd done a lot of work on Hadrian's Wall, looking for mile castles, looking for the actual line of the wall in places. And so I was familiar with that barrier, that boundary, that frontier boundary. I'd also done work up on the Antonine Wall to the north. And that was so different to the work on Hadrian's Wall because we're dealing with not a stone wall most of the time, but a turf wall, embankment and so on. And far trickier geophysics. So to hear about this opportunity of doing a fort between the two frontiers, I just couldn't believe it, jumped at the opportunity, and it all came good.
Well, the fantastic thing with this is it had been discovered as a crop mark, hadn't it? Been spotted on aerial photographs, I think in the 60s or 70s, but hadn't been excavated.
That's right.
There hadn't been any geophysics, so you were the first geophysicist kind of let loose on that fort, weren't you?
Yeah, and that, in a way, is such a privilege. I mean that seriously, to have the opportunity and go and survey a site on such an amazing landscape and also near to quite a nice little castle. You'd look at the aerial photograph, you could convince yourself what was there. And when we started doing the magnetics, when the road lines were coming out, the ditches were starting to appear, we knew we were onto the goods. You just then want to get the whole survey completed to be able to see the full extent of the site. And it's a big site. It took us quite a long time. We could probably do it far more quickly these days, but we got some really nice results.
And actually, you do cover quite a large area. I was just looking at the report, and there's 1 hectare that you cover in the actual interior of the fort, and 3.4 hectares that include the annex as well, sort of further afield. So that's a large area to cover.
Yeah, but the 3.5 hectares was done magnetically. Mm-hmm. So that, as you say, covered the footprint of the fort and the immediate area beyond, including this small annex that appeared. The 1 hectare we did inside was actually with the resistance instruments, because basically with the magnetics, we're seeing ditches, pits, areas of burning, and streets will appear as negative, sort of white lines, because they're less magnetic because of the stones. When you do the resistance survey, you get the opposite effect. You see the roads as high resistance because the electric currents won't go through the compacted road surfaces. And then the ditches, because they're full of moist soil, they'll show as negatives, white areas. And in this particular instance, what the resistance showed was that we were just seeing roads inside the fort. We weren't really seeing any large buildings as such, because they weren't really fully stone built, apart from parts of the main building, the Principia. The buildings, the barracks and so on, would have been timber built. They might have had some stone footings beneath the posts, but not enough to stay in the ground and register a change in resistance. Whereas any areas that had been burnt down, they would show magnetically. And that's why we could see the outline of the buildings, the barrack blocks and the Principia, and another variety of responses. And then there were one or two enigmatic anomalies, which, you know, people are going to have to watch the programme to discover what they were.
Actually, what I really like is the irony, because what the Romans did when they left the fort was they destroyed it because they didn't want their enemies to reuse it. So they burnt it down, they razed it. And actually, that's done archaeologists a huge favour because, in effect, it's helped to preserve it, hasn't it? That burning layer.
Yeah, and that's helped us from the geophysics point of view, because where you get burning, you get changes in the magnetism in the soils. And so ditch fills show more clearly, pits show more clearly. They couldn't have done better for us, really.
And we should just say, actually, your backdrop there, that is part of the geophysics, isn't it?
Yes, that's the magnetic survey. You can just see the sort of playing card pattern and the white lines of the streets and the ditches outside. And if I just swap the screen very briefly, that's the magnetics you're looking at now. Now, this is the resistance survey. Mm-hmm. And what you're seeing there, the black lines are showing the main streets, the roads, high resistance because they're compacted stones and so on, so the electric currents won't go through. And so you can see the network of streets, but not a lot else. That's because there weren't really major stone buildings on the site, as I said earlier. You know, so we get mixed information, not mixed information, we get differing information from the two techniques. And what was exciting about this site is, and I think I'm right in saying it doesn't appear that much in the television, but I think if you wait until the end of day 2, you get a quick shot of a new instrument we tried.
Oh, yeah.
Most of our work people will be familiar with, where we go along like this with an old Zimmer frame. Well, if you watch out carefully, you'll see the advance from that Zimmer frame to the wheelchair. It's all exciting stuff.
It very much is, isn't it?
And what's happened in recent years is that GPR has taken over. And because you don't have to make a particular contact with spikes like you do in resistance surveys, GPR relies on a sensor that just sits on the ground, and you drag the sensor across the ground so you could go at far greater speeds.
By GPR, you mean ground penetrating radar?
Yeah. You know what you're talking about.
Well, I've learned from the best.
Yeah. That can't have been me then. The GPR, the radar, you pull the antenna across the ground and it sends signals in and comes back. They go from the transmitter back to the receiver. And that gives you a plan like the resistance surveys did, but it also gives you depth information. And that's why people are tending nowadays to use radar rather than resistance surveys. There's certain circumstances where you'd use resistance, but on a fort like this, I'd love to go back and do radar over it, because the radar will see both the ditches and the pits that you can see in the magnetics. What it won't tell you in the radar, though, is where you've got areas of metalworking, where you've got highly burnt features. So you still need to throw one or two techniques at a site to get the full information back.
I think the geophysics plot is absolutely amazing, isn't it? It's extensive. So you can actually see the whole of the fort, that classic, what we just mentioned, the playing card. So it's kind of rectangular with rounded corners.
Yeah.
and you can see the streets, you can see the buildings. I mean, it is really like it's a classic fort, isn't it? Because they used to lay these out
systematically.
They had a set plan
Yes.
when they set these forts out. They kind of
Yeah.
knew what they were doing. They all sort of conformed, didn't they? So what's fantastic once in the program, once they get your geophysics results and they stick that first trench in and go, oh yeah, this is where we are. They can then navigate where exactly they are within the fort, and they can literally kind of project and walk, say, whatever, 20 meters, and go, well, this is the Via Principalis, this is this area, this is where the barracks were, and they can work it all out. It's amazing.
That's Romanist for you. I mean, it's not exactly a difficult task, is it, recognizing where the features are, because there's so many hundreds of these forts, all to very similar plans.
What I think is wonderful about that is that it's 2,000 years old. It's under the ground, and it's that you run the geophysics over it, or you run your instruments over it, and there it is. You can see it.
And you don't need that whiskey to believe it.
No, that's very true. In fact, actually, I mean, this is quite interesting because we're concentrating on talking about the Romans here, but the reason that the Romans had gone all that way into Scotland, so we're talking the area above Hadrian's Wall at that time, is because you've got the tribes up there, the Iron Age people living up there. So you've got the Votadini, Novantai, and the Seligovi, who are all documented in classical texts. And they're up there causing trouble, which is why the Romans are building forts there in the first place, aren't they?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But you're getting a bit too archaeological for me there.
Well, I just think it's because quite often, people talk about Roman forts and they talk about this playing card shape, but this is about sort of trying to understand the bigger picture. Why is it where it is, really? And in fact, actually, Stuart does some brilliant landscape archaeology, looking at.
Well, he does some landscape archaeology. He recognises something on an aerial photograph, and he's not quite sure what it is. He asks us to see if it goes anywhere. It doesn't. But fortunately, we have an expert in the programme who knows all about annexes to forts and tells Stuart what it is. Not that I'm running Stuart down at all.
The rivalry clearly continues.
Absolutely.
I'm telling you.
No, seriously. I mean, I think Stuart was one of the first people to point out that this fort sits on a sort of plateau. Mm-hmm. And once you notice that, you can't help but seeing it every time. But until he's pointed it out, you don't fully recognise it. Yeah. So he does have his uses.
I was just going to say, I'm looking forward to the banter again, with the forthcoming excavations. I think that's going to be really good fun in September.
I'll be there.
So what would you say your top moment was on this episode? Favourite memories?
Oh, just getting the full picture of the whole fort. And again, it is actually really nice seeing the archaeologists have faith in the geophysics to the extent they can see for themselves different components of the fort, and they can choose where to excavate because it will answer specific questions, target the ditches, try and see if there's different phases, try and get some dating evidence from those ditches. Well, without the geophysics, they'd have to be digging far bigger trenches. It would take far more. And with these evaluations, Time Team is looking to get the maximum information from the minimum amount of trenching, because we don't want to destroy the remains. We want to learn more about them. And I think that's important. So the geophysics and Stuart's work puts the fort in the wider landscape. It gives you the detailed picture. Because nobody had realised that it was definitely a fort, nobody had dug it before, then Time Team has produced all that dating information for it confirmed the layout. And what more could you want in a 3-day piece of archaeology?
Amazing, isn't it? It really is. And I should also say, actually, I really like the cameo piece that they have in there, where they have a local metal worker actually having a go at making a Draco, which is a kind of Roman military standard.
Which they reckon they use for making noises.
Yeah, it's actually recorded again in classical text. They mention that these things that had sort of silky tails, so they moved about in the wind and looked alive. But the sort of the mouth part, the head part, was made of metal, and made these really scary, harrowing sounds. And we don't know exactly how it worked. And I think this is the fantastic bit here. They're having a go at trying to see if they can replicate that, and I think that's really fun. And you see some of these on stone sculptures across the Roman Empire. You can sort of see them, and there's only, as far as I know, only been one actually ever discovered, and that was on one of the Limes fortresses in Niederbiber in Germany, dating to the 3rd century. So the metal worker is having a go. I think he's called Tim Blade. He's having a go at replicating this, and I just think that's a really nice little cameo piece in there.
And I suppose one thing I've not mentioned, Danny, is Victor's drawings.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Because every programme I was stunned how quickly he could convert everyone's ideas into a pictorial presentation of what we thought was going on. I mean, you combine the geophysics and go from under the ground and merge into one of his drawings with everything reconstructed, with all the skill he'd got and the style, and it just really brought everything to home. I know we've got immensely powerful 3D graphics, and going forward, we'll continue to rely on those 3D graphics. But to have an artist of Victor's knowledge and experience and skill on site to present those drawings, I think it beats a computer hands down.
It really brings it home, doesn't it? I think you're really able to kind of imagine what life was like by looking at Victor's illustrations.
Yeah, sadly missed.
Yeah, very much so. But I think that the fantastic thing is that we have permission from Victor's family to actually have his illustrations on site with the forthcoming excavations. So we'll be able to kind of use them to refer to, which is brilliant, isn't it?
Fantastic, yeah. I can't wait to see some of them again.
Yes, absolutely. So just to recap on this episode, why do you think people should watch this?
What answer do I normally give? There's only one answer, and it's behind me on the screen.
I can see
that's
where this
produced
is going.
In 3 days. The geophysics, one of the best sites I've been on. The archaeology is pretty good as well.
Fantastic. John, it's been a pleasure catching up with you again. Nice to see you. And thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and information about this wonderful site.
Take care.
I'm at the very start of a fugu, and it might be that there's more of these tunnels and caverns existing on this site. We're going to be here in September, so please join us then and back us on Patreon so we can do more and more work on these wonderful sites.